Welcome to the Brave New Wealth podcast, where we discuss wealth from multiple perspectives, from the mental, physical, social, financial perspectives. I'm your host, Julienna. Bienvenue à tout le monde. Bienvenido a todos. Herzlich willkommen. Everyone is welcome here. This podcast is sponsored by Engineer Tax Services, where I am a director. Engineer Tax Services is a subsidiary of Engineer Tax Advisory, and our goal is to empower business owners, CPAs, entrepreneurs, real estate investors with proven strategies, with education, with innovation to help you take advantage of these often overlooked tax strategies. Today, I am very, very excited to have with us Kim Lochridge. Kim is the Executive Vice President of Engineer Tax Services, a leading provider of specialty tax services in the U.S. and abroad. She has a strong background in real-world business management and a deep understanding of the tax code related to real estate and energy efficiency. She has become a trusted advisor to Fortune 500 companies, high net worth individuals, family offices, architects, engineers, and CPAs nationwide. As a real estate investor since the late 90s, Kim's expertise has earned her a seat at the tax committee for the Washington, D.C.-based Real Estate Roundtable, where she collaborates with top lawmakers on tax policies. She also holds multiple board positions, contributing her knowledge to various industries initiatives. With over 25 years of entrepreneurial experience in real estate and the energy industry, Kim has played key roles in shaping tax strategies that drive investment and sustainability. She is a sought-after speaker in tax, investment, private wealth, and family offices sectors. She is passionate about sharing her insights and helping others navigate complex tax incentives and financial strategies. Kim, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I know firsthand how busy it is right now with everyone running in, wanting, all of the advice possible to lower that tax burden. But before we dig into that, I do like to ask my guests, well, first of all, you have a super impressive background, and there is more. I haven't even touched everything. But if you were to meet someone in an elevator and just tell them, who is Kim, how would you introduce yourself?
That's a great question, Juliana. And thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm honored that you would ask. What would I say in an elevator to somebody? I would say, essentially, people consider me a tax genie because I can typically take a dime and turn it into $1.
That's awesome. That is wonderful. So something I like to ask also to start with is, what is something you've done recently that is outside of your comfort zone, that was a bit challenging, but you told yourself, hey, I want the growth. I want to do this. Maybe it's not going to be easy, but that's something I want to try and do because I know it's going to be beneficial for me. And it can be in whether, mental, physical wealth, social, financial. And when we talk about wealth, it's really the multiple aspects of it. So if anything comes to mind that recently was a little bit, uncomfortable, but then you were like, okay, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah, it's also a great question. And, I thought about this and I was thinking, what have I done? And it's really interesting because I tend to live outside of my comfort zone all the time. Of course, I like my comfort zone, but just like everybody else. But it is, I think my life has been turned upside down so many times that I'm used to living outside of my comfort zone and outside of a schedule. And so a lot of things that I do, I'm not scared of them. So investment strategies, investment opportunities, things like that, as long as I do my due diligence. But I think personally, one of the biggest challenges that I have been facing, my mom passed away a couple of years ago, and I brought my dad to come live with us, and although I love every second of it and I wouldn't have it any other way, it's a challenge to try to maneuver schedules and, time between my husband and I and things like that. Cause we do everything together with my dad. He's like our third wheel. We love having him around and we love, we do everything together. We cook together, we clean together, we do everything. So it's been a challenge, getting into the new phase. Like now that my kids are out of the house, and they're grown, to start transitioning to taking care of parents. And recently we just have made the decision that we're going to have Dave's mom and his sister move in with us. So we're going to have, 5 adults living with us. And it's just, it's such an honor and a blessing to be able to spend, the last years with our parents in this way. And we just really want to honor them and respect them. But it is a challenge, and that's been something that has been new for us. And so that's probably what I would say to that.
Wow, that is very, very impressive. And I will tell you, just, from having lived in different places in the world, it's actually very rare in the US and in the Western world to have that, to bring in, and not to place judgment. Everyone has a different situation. It's not an easy thing to do. Lots of people opt out, and it has nothing to do with how much you love, your parents. I admire that, in Asian and African and other culture, it is, you don't have a choice.
Yes.
That's what we do.
That's right.
But here you are doing it by choice. And I think it's so admirable. And yes, my mom passed away a few years ago too. And I know the challenge of that. And she refused to live with her children, although we wanted to take her on. She said, nope, I don't want to, which, I do regret a little bit because, I mean, as you know, it's you've got to enjoy those moments because they're not forever. So that is super remarkable. With that, I want to ask you another question that's, outside of work before we dig into it.
Yeah.
But what are some of the things you like to do? And also, because we work together, I'm taking advantage of the fact I can ask you things that I may not ask you on our meetings, in our calls. But what are some of the things you enjoy doing outside of work to balance a little bit with the heavy lifting that we do every day?
Yeah, it is a heavy lift. It is a lot of work, what we do, and we're very busy. And I appreciate that. I always say make hay while the sun shines. But outside of work, most people have hobbies. And I have real estate. So that tends to be, what we like to do for fun. My husband and I are both involved in real estate. We have a lot of properties. We manage a lot of investments in real estate as well as other investments. But, we do love to travel. So we travel a lot. We're always looking at real estate where we're going. Doesn't matter what country, we just really enjoy learning different areas. And so travel is probably what we would say as far as we love traveling. We go to multiple countries every year, and that's just something that we really enjoy. So probably travel.
Awesome. So tell us, what are like 1 or 2 favorite spots you have?
Still my top is Tahiti. I just love the South Pacific. I am a water baby. I love the water. I scuba dive. I love the wildlife under the water and sea life. That's my happy place. So by far, that's it so far. We're going to, and my youngest daughter is graduating from college in May. And so we're taking her on a senior trip after her 5 years of hard work.
Wow.
And, so we're going to Thailand for the first time. So I'm really excited about doing that trip in May.
Very nice. So did you pick up a little français? Vous parlez un peu français from Tahiti, or?
Yeah, a little bit. I've been doing my Duolingo,
Awesome. Me too. I love it. it. So, and where in Thailand are you going? That's a beautiful place as well.
Yeah, we're going to fly into Bangkok, and then we're going to take a round trip within a round trip and do Phuket for, because we love the water and the beach. So we're going to spend 4 or 5 days outside of the city and go to the
Very
beach.
nice.
So, yeah.
Very nice. I love that. I love that you're so curious about different places and different cultures. It's such an enhancement. Okay. I do want to tell our listeners that I met you at a conference about almost a year ago.
Yeah.
Time has flown by. And I have to say that both, you and Heidi despite like the very impressive background you have, that can be intimidating a little bit.
Ugh,
But when we meet you, you are so warm and so
well,
kind. And that's really the first thing I remember about you, just meeting you in this big room and your big smile and just being
well,
so kind. And that's kind of what stayed with me. So I was excited to come on and work
well,
for you and with
yeah.
you.
Yes, thank you so much. That's really sweet of you to say.
So, with that said, I do want to ask you, how did you land at Engineer Tech Services, where you are now a partner and have a very big role? What pulled you into even the tax world, which, as we know, unless, you're like really passionate about it from I don't know when, but usually people kind of fall into it. Like I could say that for myself too. It wasn't the plan, but you
Mhm.
fall into it and then it's like Alibaba's cavern and you're like, whoa, how did I not know? So I want to hear your story about falling into, the real estate and tax world and being at Engineer Tax Services today.
Yeah, so it is a little bit of a story. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 17 years old, and I've always been a business owner, really interested in business. My background has been in finance and accounting, my education, and really just I was always really good at math, but I hated it. And everyone was like, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. You know how people try to force you into certain
Mm-hmm.
industry, and it was like, oh, and then as soon as they started putting dollar signs in front of those numbers, I kind of found my calling, It's like anything having to do with money. And I'm like, I really need to be in accounting. And so that's kind of how it started really young. And I've always been very interested in it and very good with money and understood the concepts. I actually started working for a credit card collection company when I was 17 years old, and
Okay.
I was doing that as well as running my business. So that it's just I learned very young at a very early age about credit and about money and finances and that kind of stuff, and that really started to pave the way for me. And fast forward, I had multiple businesses. I was on the board of a big manufacturing company in San Diego, that $1 billion manufacturer for energy efficient products. And I went to one of their conferences, and we were training a lot of the dealers, and they said something about this 179D, this energy efficient tax credit.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're like, oh, don't chase after it. It's too hard. You have to get an engineer. It's too expensive. It's not going to work, so just disregard it. Our product doesn't qualify. And I'm like sitting in the back room thinking to myself, this doesn't really make any sense to me, because you have, energy efficient tax deduction, and we have an energy efficient product, but for some reason it doesn't work. And so I started digging in myself and just saying, why does something doesn't pass my smell test, right? So I have this common sense that just kind of really reared its ugly head, and wouldn't let me let go of it like a dog with a bone. And so I started asking around in the space, and I said, hey, do you know anyone who knows about this 179D? And it was a friend of a friend of a friend who introduced me to my current boss. And after I got on the phone with him, for Julio, for about an hour, I learned a little bit more about this energy efficiency. And over the course of, speaking with him a couple of times, I discovered, after going back and forth, that the engineers who were saying that it wasn't worth it weren't really calculating it the right way. And then I talked to the people who were doing the actual work, and I somehow pieced that together. And so I told the manufacturer, I said, give me one of your engineers and fly to Florida with me, and let's go meet this guy in person, and I'll have them explain it in engineering language why, you guys are wrong,
Mm-hmm.
why
Mm-hmm.
this is such a big opportunity. So flew to Florida, met with Julio, never met him before in my life, and proceeded to basically just tell these engineers that they needed to speak their language, and that this is what I had figured out. And they had, educated each other. And at the time, 179D was very, very new. It just came out in 2006. And I think this was in about 2007. And so nobody really knew anything about it. And yet, Julio had spent so much time with me. And so he just goes, I don't know where you came from or who the hell you are, but you need to come work for me, And I don't need a job. I'm an entrepreneur, And so he did call me. I swear he put that on a drip every month. And he was one of the best follow-up people I've ever met. Just every month without fail would call me, pick up the phone,
Wow.
call me, and just say, you need to come work for me. And I just kept telling him, no, 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 no. And so after about 12 months, it was a good year, a little more than a year. He says, why won't you come work for me? And I said, one, I'm an entrepreneur. I have 4 businesses. I don't need a job. And to be honest with you, I don't do well with authority. I need to just work
Very honest.
True entrepreneur, right?
Uh-huh.
And and he just said to me, he says, well, he says, and I told him, I says, and I don't like being told what to do.
And you were very honest.
Yeah, I was very honest with him, and we just became a friend, and I was just jabbing and joking around, but all in reality, it's not too far from the truth. And he just said, he says, I'll make it worth your while, and you need to come work for me, and I'll never tell you what to do.
Wow.
And to this day, it's been almost 17 years. And to this day, I can honestly tell you that he has never told me what to do. He's always respected my opinion and my place. And we've built this company together. And I feel really proud about being able to be a part of this organization that we have. So,
well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. And, I will say that to hear this from the mouth of a woman who has been a little bit trained and tutored by a man who respected his word, I have to say that it is remarkable and it's touching, because Heidi and I have had those conversations where sometimes she entered a room and didn't get the respect that she needed to have. And I'm sure you have many of those stories as
Happens
well.
all the time.
And you know what? You both have overcome that in a brilliant way and have established yourself as the experts that you are in rooms where maybe sometimes they might have looked at you like, I don't know if she knows what she's talking about, but you've proven yourself over and over. And the success that you both have today is a testament of that. And kudos to Julio for supporting you So I do want to ask you, from your perspective, because we don't have a lot of time and now I want to dig a little bit into what we do, but what are some of the tax incentives that you have seen real estate investors, CPAs are often overlooking, when you talk to them? And, I know some of the answers, but I want to hear from you what just kind of massively you've noticed, like people are overlooking this over and over and over again. And then we'll go into how can we help them.
Well, yeah, I will preface this by saying that I love our CPA community. I think we have a fantastic CPA community, especially the ones that we work with. And, on many occasions, I think that the CPAs are so overworked, underpaid, certainly underappreciated. And, people just expect everything to be done, drop everything on it, have it back tomorrow, and it's just not the way that it works. And when everyone does it at the same time, it's quite disrespectful. And I think there's so many people that are demanding of the CPAs. It puts a lot of pressure on them. And with the tax codes changing so many times, almost every year, there's major tax changes. It's very, very difficult for CPAs to stay on top of the 17,000 pages of tax code. So I want to preface that with saying that, I have nothing but respect for our CPAs out there. My daughter-in-law is actually studying for her CPA exam. She's already passed the first test. And, and so I really want, people to know that it's really not your CPA's obligation or job to tell you about tax credits and incentives. I think everybody thinks it is. And because tax is so intimidating sometimes, they rely and they think, oh, I'm going to put my head in the sand. And if this was something that was valid for me, then my CPA would have told me, so then they discount it because they don't want to dig into the truth or the tax code or do the research, right? And so they do rely on their CPAs, which I think is completely unfair. And then when their CPA didn't tell them about an incentive, they get upset and they change CPAs, which, their CPAs, it's just like in any other industry. You have doctors in this industry. Some more than others. Some have more experience in certain things. And, unfortunately, you just can't expect that The biggest message is that you need to take your taxes and educate yourself and be aware of what opportunities there are out there and use your resources. Do not rely on your tax professional for that. Now, there are some CPAs out there who do a great job, but still, I think that there's things that are missed. One of the biggest things that is missed is cost segregation. And that's because there are so many myths out there about cost segregation. You're going to take all the depreciation up front. You won't have anything left. I've heard you can't use it because you're a passive investor. I've heard, you're not going to benefit from it because you're only holding it for a short time, or you're not going to benefit because you're holding it for a long time. I mean, I've heard everything you can think of across the board because there's just not a lot of true education. And I think there's a lot of people who are trying to get that education out there on YouTube videos that are disastrous, and so don't believe everything you hear on the internet. Do your research. But some of the other things, as far as specifically in real estate, cost segregation is often missed, but 179D and 45L, those energy efficient credits that kind of brought me into the industry, those are almost non-existent. I mean, rarely do I ever see CPAs talking about those. And I think it should be, more exposed. So those are just some of the things, the partial asset disposition, which is also what we do. And when somebody does repairs, I think that's often missed many, many times. So, take those challenges into your own hands, really dig into the taxes and really try and understand where things belong. It's very complicated, but if you just follow some of the trails, you can figure it out. And that's what I would encourage, listeners to really, really get involved in their taxes and ask questions.
Thank you. 3 things I want to say. So yes, absolutely. We work with thousands of CPAs, and people are constantly looking for CPAs. It's like this wheel of never ending, do you have a CPA for me? So yes, come to us because we will refer to you, the good CPAs we know. I want to ask you, because you mentioned a lot of 45L and 179D, what's the difference? Or maybe tell us in a nutshell, what are they? What are these energy tax incentives? And what's the difference between 45L and 179D?
Yeah, great question. The 179D is an energy efficient tax deduction. Okay, so that's a deduction. The 45L is a credit. They're for different purposes. So the 179D, although it has morphed over the years, so I'll just give you kind of what the rules are now so that I don't confuse you, but the 179D, typically it's for new construction of commercial property or multifamily that has 4 stories or more. Okay, so if you have larger multifamily, higher rise apartment buildings, we can do a 179D study and get a certification for a tax deduction up to $5 a square foot. Oftentimes that's missed, and you can couple that with a cost segregation study and do both and get both benefits. In fact, right before this call, I had a client call me and said, I want to move forward with this. He's got a cost seg and a 179D study. He's doing both. So those are often missed. And so we have to do a lot of educating for our clients that are doing those new construction projects. The 45L is a tax credit, which is much better than a deduction. The 179D is up to $5 a square foot. Okay. And I think I may have mentioned that, but the 45L is $5,000 per unit. And this is geared more towards new construction of apartment buildings, right? You can get it on single family homes, but we typically don't do anything less than 20 units. So you have to be, building quite a few of them to get those credits. But this tax credit is about $5,000. It is up to $5,000 per unit. Okay. And so if you're doing any kind of multifamily, and that's any size multifamily, so it could be 1-story multifamily, 6 units, 10 units, 20 units, 16 units, whatever you have. And that could be quite beneficial. So that's kind of the difference between the two. And there's a lot of criteria to meet, but we don't have time to dig into all that. So
right. So what's the minimum? Because you said up to 5,000. What's the minimum someone could get using the 45L?
Yeah, so the minimum is
strategy?
500.
Okay.
Well, the minimum 0. If you
I,
qualify, the minimum is
well,
500, and
yes, if
then
you
it kind of
qualify.
ekes up from there. It goes from
Gotcha.
500 to 1,000, and then it goes up to 5,000 if you meet certain other criteria. So it's based on energy efficiency. So you need to be building units that are super uber energy efficient and have
Mm-hmm.
Energy Star ready and that kind of stuff to get the maximum benefit. Plus, you have to meet the prevailing wages in the county. So to get the maximum. But if you don't meet that, then the 500 is the minimum. So it's 500 to 5,000 is usually what the amount is.
Okay. So, I'm going to dig just a little bit more. What are the prevailing wages? So just for someone who's like, oh, I think I might be able to qualify for this. So what's the prevailing wages that are required?
Yeah, you can look at your county's prevailing wage at sam.gov, and that will tell you it's a prevailing wage is essentially you have to meet the minimum wage for that area. And you also
Okay.
have to meet apprenticeship rules. So the people that you hire to construct the building from top to bottom, you've
Mm-hmm.
got to make sure that you're paying them a decent wage in order to get the maximum benefits from the energy efficiency, which I think is a little bit unrelated. And I think the Trump administration is trying to overturn some of the prevailing wages and revert back to some of the old rules pre-2023,
Mm-hmm.
which we're in the process of working on right now. So that's something that on the real estate roundtable. So I'm on the tax committee and the sustainability committees for the real estate roundtable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that. I do want to ask you, how can CPAs, I mean, you've already mentioned it a little bit, but how can CPAs really benefit from what Engineer Tech Services has to offer, to their clients?
Yes, like I said, we love CPAs. I love working with them. I love educating. I love, just the camaraderie that I have with my CPAs and my clients. But I think the biggest benefit is really just to be a resource. They don't have to know all of this ins and outs about the cost segregation or the 45L or the research and development tax credits or the 179D. They can simply send us a quick email. We trust me when I tell you that we pride ourselves in white glove service. We are responsive, we are educated, we understand our product inside and out, and we want to share that knowledge, and we want to be a resource to those CPAs so that they can pass along this information to their clients in an accurate manner and be able to provide these services for them and be a shining star, because
Mm-hmm.
if they can help and bring these things to their CPAs, it really makes a difference for the client's experience.
Yes. And I will add to this that to illustrate, I talked to 3 people today who were just ecstatic. They were like, thank you so much. This made my day. Thank you for that information. And it makes my day too when I know that I was able to, provide that type of education. So we're almost, oh my goodness, I could be talking to you for many hours, but then we might start getting a little too nerdy and then people might phase out. But I do want to ask you, what is one experience you've had where just a success story where that kind of stands out? I know you've helped thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people by now. But what is maybe one story that stands out where you were able to bring some of those services and see a change in someone's business, that they had no idea, and now that you brought that to them, just you opened that door for them, and it's something that stayed with you. And I'm sure, if you get a little stressed or sad, you think about that story, it's like, okay, I can move on.
Yeah.
I can move forward.
I have a lot of experiences like that. I'm so blessed every day to work with the people that I work with, to be able to assist them in those ways. And don't get me wrong, I am very interested in learning from my clients as much as they learn from me. So I pick their brains. I learn about so many different businesses and investment opportunities and things like that. But probably the most recent one that just happened, last week, and it was just such an honor. One of my clients from a couple of years ago called, and he's got a bunch of assisted living facilities and across the country, and he called and we had saved him, millions and millions of dollars. And we just really hit it off and had some great discussions about taxes and saved him so much. And he was just in awe. He had no idea. He hadn't ever heard of cost segregation before. So we did these on his facilities. And he called me just last week and he said, "It's been a while since I talked to you. Just want to catch up. And I just wanted to tell you that I'm actually looking at potentially selling my business and, for in the $1 billion range. Okay.
Mhm.
And I would like for you to sit with me and help me strategize on how I can minimize the tax on my sale of my business. It's not going to happen until next year and we have time to plan, but I'm starting to get ready right now." And, just to have somebody of that caliber reach out to me and ask me for assistance and that kind of thing, and know that I have not only my own knowledge of helping him and have done it in the past, but also the resources to be able to help him with that, the tax strategies and whatnot, was really fantastic. I felt so honored, to be able to be a part of that transaction and that call. So, there's been countless others. I had another client that did the same thing that came back to me and just said, "You are so helpful with us with taxes. We really want you to be a part of this." And a lot of that is part of the real estate roundtable. And I work with so many family offices and high net worth folks, and I learn from them, and I'm able to use that expertise for helping my clients as well. And it goes way beyond engineered tax services. It goes beyond what I know and what we do with just tax deductions and tax credits, and really goes into investment strategies because of my experience and what I've done and the investing that I have done. So those are some of the examples.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this. Yes, just bringing the light, and opening doors that people didn't know existed. That's also what gets me excited every day to do what I do. And having, again, no idea I would end up here
Yeah.
with, in the tax world, but there's just so much. Now, you already kind of answered the question. My next question was, when should people consider those tax strategies? And, by telling the story, this gentleman is preparing a year in advance. So the earlier, right, is the better. Even, with the cost segregation and energy efficiency, like right now we have all these people rushing in and they're like, okay, some of it we'll be able to do, but some of it we'll have to do next year because you do need that preparation time. So yeah, I don't want to answer the question for you, but when is a good time to prepare for all these strategies?
Yeah. So I've had across the board, the sad opposite story would be, the client that comes to you in June or July of 2025 and says, "I sold my business last year. What can I do? Now I'm facing this big tax bill." And that's the saddest part. That's the saddest story that you could tell, because there's really not much we can do after the fact. And so, getting us involved on the forefront, especially of some big events like selling a property or selling a business and having a tax burden, is the earlier the better. Before you sell, not after you sell, but do it before you have that liquidity event, because there's so much more we can do by setting you up and structuring, whether it's a business for yourself or a foundation or charitable donations or a gifting trust or so many different things, potential investment strategies, and putting together all of those things, which is so fun for me. That's like my highlight of doing things and having those conversations with my clients. But if you come in after the fact, you've just shot yourself in the foot, and you've taken an emotional experience and you're so busy and focused on the sale that you weren't really thinking about strategic tax planning after that sale. And then if you wait into the following year, this poor guy was like, "Yeah, I sold my business on December 31st. Like, okay, that's the worst thing you can do, is sell a business or a property on December 31st without having a tax plan, because now you have no time to adjust or plan or pivot or, do anything else. So if you have any kind of liquidity event, figure it out now. Right now we have the largest transfer of wealth in American history happening as our baby boomers, our parents are starting to pass away, and they are leaving their wealth with their offspring. And this wealth transfer is going to create a lot of tax issues and tax problems. And, so many people, like, of course you can't predict when your parents are going to pass away, but there are things you can do. As your parents are getting older, there's things you can do ahead of time before they pass away, that you can set things up and make sure you have a trust and, make sure you've got the gifting in place. And especially if there's a lot of wealth, so many things you can do before. Don't just wait till after they pass. That's just the saddest thing, because there's so much you can do before. So, that would be my advice is get involved early in the process as possible. I know you're busy. Everybody's busy. Everybody is busy. I don't know a single person who isn't busy with life. They could be retired, they could be working, they can have kids, they can have parents. It doesn't matter who you are. Everybody's busy. Do yourself a favor. Number one, take care of yourself. Take care of your health. And number two, watch out for your wealth and take care of your wealth. And those are two things that I can leave you, and, make sure you're taking care of yourself, and then really get involved in your wealth and your taxes and your planning, and understand, because it's in your best interest, as nobody's going to have any more of your interest better than you. So that's what I would leave you with.
Thank you. Thank you, Kim. I mean, you're like, this is a great way to end, but I do want to challenge you to come again.
I'd be happy to.
And thank you so much. So true. So true. And one last question I have for you is, what are some of your goals and hopes for this year?
It's really funny you bring this up, because when this year started, my dad, came to me and he said, I think this is going to be a really good year. I watched Tony Robbins' video 10, 12 years ago that he recorded about our deficit and about how much money we owe. And it was really eye-opening to me that video reflected that we have to cut expenses. If I am in a position where I am overspending in my household expenses, and I come up on some hard times, and I'm getting into a position where I've got to do some things, or I've, maybe health problems or whatever, I need to start cutting my expenses, right? And to be able to watch that has been very interesting. I think that's going to open up a lot of opportunity for everyone, whether that's a rebate to people, or whether that's just cutting our deficit for our children or our children's children, or whatever we can do. But my dad said to me last night, he reminded me that he said that about this year. And we've had, my daughter's getting married this year. My niece is getting married this year. We're so blessed. And I'm really just looking forward to spending more time with my family and really engaging in that stuff, and just kind of watching from afar what's happening, on Capitol Hill, because there are some pretty major changes, and some are good and some are bad, but they are changes. And that's one thing that people really have a tough time with, is change. And I just think that we're going to be better because of it. So anytime you engage in that change and being uncomfortable, which is what we started this podcast with, I think that it brings it full circle. And I think there's always positive things that can come from change.
Yeah, for sure. From discomfort.
Yeah.
Hoping for the best, hoping for a bright future, and, for everyone to find a place and to feel like they belong. But thank you so, so much for sharing all this wealth of wisdom and knowledge and being authentic. There's so much more questions I have for you, but I'm going to have to invite you again.
I'd be happy to. Thank you
so much, Kim. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Brave New Wealth podcast. I am very grateful that Kim Lockridge was able to come and have this discussion with me and really share her wisdom and knowledge of several decades on real estate tax incentives. Reach out to us to get a free benefit analysis on your property if you own a commercial property, to get a Engineer Opportunity Report, which basically shows you what are the tax incentives available for your business in your state, in your industry, on a state and federal level. I'm your host, Julienna. I hope you will join me for the next episode. A bientôt.